we can tell everybody about it. This is the first time that we've actually stopped the intro because it was so bad. we just are like, well, we'll use it. But in this case, it was just no good.
Well, maybe it was because it was so bad, or maybe it's because we're just so professional now.
What we were doing was we were inviting you to grab your tickets to Bournemouth and Brighton coming up. By the time this episode airs, it will be in about a month. But Sarah was afraid to annoy you, so she was sort of sing-songing it. like, all right, well, come out. You can get tickets. There's 2 tickets left, blah, blah, blah. And I said, that's no way to invite somebody to come see us. They're not going to be very excited to do so. But then I couldn't do any better.
Yeah. Well, this is why we need the peppy American rather than the tired Brit.
That's right. Come on out and see us in Bournemouth. If there are tickets left, by the way. I think there should be some left for Brighton because that'll be a larger event. But Bournemouth, we may or may not have tickets left. But if you're like, you know what? Gosh darn it, I just want to go meet those gals or other people who listen to the podcast and hang out on the beach, check out the links below because we'll provide the ticket. Goodness.
That'll do.
We're just going to keep going because our topic today is body neutrality, which I think body positivity is a more mainstream term. I don't even know that everybody knows what body positivity is. But it's definitely more talked about than body neutrality. I find myself discussing body neutrality and people are like, what is that? What is it? And so I think it's worth talking about both because the distinction for me is really important. And I'll explain why in a moment, but to start, and I'm just going to talk off the cuff. I'm not pulling up a definition because I think what actually people think about when we talk about body positivity, I think mainstream connotations of that is loving your body. And being able to look in the mirror and like love what you see no matter what. But its actual origins are in the 1960s. It was a fat activist movement to give marginalized bodies a voice. And by marginalized bodies, I mean fat Black women, mostly. And also, I think there was an identification with the LGBTQ community. But all of this to say, like, body neutrality is something different entirely.
Because you began by saying that more people, it seems, have at least heard of the term body positivity. And I think there's more energy in body positivity as a concept, understanding the roots, but also this idea of positivity is this sort of uplifting, just
empowerment.
There's more around it. Yes, empowerment. Whereas body neutrality, really, just what
so gray,
neutral.
So beige.
How do you talk about that in an exciting way?
I'm going to do it. I'm going to take you up on that.
Yes.
So, to be clear, yes, positivity as a word is much more fancy and fun than neutrality, but there's no way that I personally could have. I wouldn't have even contemplated getting to a place of positivity from the place I was at. And for many people who identify with their bodies as like, just this isn't something I love. This is not something I'm going to look in the mirror and feel positively about. Like that's so much of a stretch that I'm not even going to try. Because this is where I was. Body neutrality is like a different option where it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be yay. It can just be like way less. The lack of energy around it is the appeal. It's like, oh gosh, I'm not responsible for loving my body or pretending that I love my body because that's not happening. And by the way, that's not true for everybody. I've had a client say to me, I don't want to just be body neutral. Like I want to look in the mirror and love what I see. And anyone who says that to me, I'm like, well, then you have the capacity for it because I don't even want that. Like I'm just fine with being neutral. And again, we haven't even talked about what that really is. If you have body positivity, just skip this episode. You might not need it, or you might, and it's not to preclude you from having body positivity. But body neutrality is a different option where it's just that you might care about your body. You might have an opinion about the way it looks. You might have an opinion that you don't like the way it looks. And that doesn't mean you can't be body neutral. Body neutral is just saying, yeah, that's my opinion of my body. And it just doesn't matter as much to me. Right? So it's being able to minimize the amount of space that opinion takes up and to just kind of neutralize. Because in my life, body image was like force number one. Like this was like the thing that determined if I was having a good day or not, that determined if I liked myself or not. It was an emergency if I looked in the mirror and was like, I don't like the way I look. Well, that meant a lot of things. That had a whole trajectory for me. And now that same experience can happen where I look in the mirror and don't like the way I look. And then it's like, well, what else is going on? And it's just sort of taking that and shrinking it down to something more neutral.
Would it be fair to say, though, if you look in the mirror and you don't like what you see, that there's still a feeling that comes along with that?
Yeah.
Because it kind of sounded like, just the way you said it then, obviously we've spoken about this, so I don't think this is what you were trying to say, but it's how it might sound to the listener, is that even when you look at yourself and you're not liking what you see, you're having a day where body image feels more difficult, that you still feel neutral in those moments.
Oh, no, I don't feel, I can feel upset. I can feel discouraged. I can feel disappointed. I can feel angry. And I do. I have those feelings. It's just that those feelings don't take me around like a dog on a leash, right? So they used to just be like, as soon as I had them, that's what I became. And then that was what guided my day.
Yeah. And that's the important thing, because I think body neutrality can sound like not caring. I no longer care. When sometimes we can't help that. The reaction is biological nervous system response, right? That we can't necessarily interrupt at the source. In the work that you've done and continue to do, it's like your mind can see that and go, okay, yep, that sucks. I'm in something, I can name it and I can work through it and bring myself back down to a kind of base. Because body neutrality, I think, is not feeling nothing. And I think that's an important piece of it as well, because how do you stop caring about something that potentially you have spent years, if not decades, caring about and having all kinds of feelings about? And like anything else, it fluctuates. So I would say that my baseline is pretty body neutral. And I can have days where I feel a lot better about my body and I might feel more positively towards my body, and days where maybe I don't feel quite as positive towards my body. But my baseline, I would say, is in the neutral body neutrality area.
Yeah.
Do you ever think of it like that? Is that you have a baseline now, or does that not quite resonate with how you think about those?
I think, yes, I think my baseline's more body neutral. It's probably not as baseline as yours, because it's a little, I have to reroute it there. Sometimes I have to remember it. I wrote an email the other day about my arms and how we talked about this in a different episode, where I was noticing my arms aging and the way that they jiggle. And I had an opinion, like I felt a way about it. And then I was like, oh, wait, it's not an emergency. Like, I don't actually have to care. Oh, right. And then that, having worked on that not caring behind the scenes for so many years, it's like when I remember that, I have access into, oh yeah, that's how I do that. That's right. I go into that sort of baseline space. But I have to sometimes remember that that's an option for me. And that's, I think, because it was a lifelong concern. Like, it was a lifelong value for me, and maybe not as much for you, right? So my baseline has to be rerouted a little bit more often.
Do you know where the term comes from, where it began?
Which one? Body neutrality?
Body neutrality, yeah.
I don't. Interestingly, I do not.
Yeah. How old do you think it might be? At a guess.
30 years.
Oh, no, not
10.
really. It says the term body neutrality, this is from the Anglia Ruskin University website, first emerged around 2015. However, it gained popularity in 2016 when counsellor Anne Warrior, I don't know if I'm totally butchering that, began leading workshops that aim to help participants understand that loving their bodies isn't always a realistic goal. Good old Anne.
Good on her. I wonder if she still hosts them.
Yeah,
I host one.
I wonder if she is. In fact, I'm going to take a moment to Google this. I feel like that surname sounds French. It's probably not. Oh, she's on Instagram with 660 followers. That doesn't sound right. She's a certified intuitive eating counselor and body neutrality and mindset coach. So it still says that she didn't necessarily come up with it, but she's the person who made it more mainstream, apparently.
Well, good for her. And
she's not shouting about that in her bio, which I saw I think I sent it to you at the time. I saw an article somewhere, and in the comments, there was somebody who used to be head of some eating disorder organization in the US who was saying, by the way, I'm the one who came up with the term emotional eating. Body neutrality, yes, but emotional in eating, I feel like plenty of people would have put those words together, and that no one person can claim that.
Who knows? She may have. I'm going to look into that. It probably came about, my guess is that the resurgence of, or the emergence of the word, and then the subsequent popularity of it, was a product of social media, because I think body positivity as a trend was gaining momentum before that. And I think that, social media is such a wonderful place for lots of different voices to come up and lots of, mainstream views to come up or non-mainstream views to come up and gain traction because people are relating to it. And that would have been my first question is like, I don't feel positive about my body and I don't think it's possible for me. Are there any other options? And I remember learning about this from Jessie Nealand, who wrote a book called Body Neutral. Actually, she recently wrote that book. I learned about this from her back in 2018. So she must have, she was sort of the one who introduced that to me. And at the time when she said it, I I was like, what? Like, I couldn't wrap my head around it fully at first because I was like, what do you mean? What's the difference between having an opinion about your body and not caring about it? Like these things are one and the same. Like I couldn't understand the difference. And I think it took me a while to think about it like, oh, wait, there's an option? Like, how do you even have one? And then it's like, the more you think about that and conceptualize options with feelings, you're like, oh, maybe there is though one. Oh, like, and then I remember just getting these glimpses into what that might mean. And I think I got those glimpses by looking at other people and noticing like how they were speaking about their bodies or how they were just acting. And once you start to see that as an option, you're like, oh, I didn't realize I had a choice. Because the world would have you believe that if your body isn't right, like if it's not meeting standard, that's on you, buddy. And your job is to fix it, and at least if you're trying and apologizing for it, you're at least doing something, at least you're acknowledging your failure and working at it. But this was like spearheading this idea was this being like, no, I'm not doing that. And actually I don't care. And when I would see people like that, I have to admit that there was a little bit of was very confronting because it's like, well, I've spent my whole life caring and trying to care or fix it. And if you're saying that there's an option to not have to do that, it almost minimizes the struggle. And then I was like, oh, it minimizes the struggle. That's fantastic. And then it grew from there. And now I think it without body neutrality, I don't think I could be here. I mean, on the podcast.
Well, I think that's the thing. It would never have occurred to me that opting out was an option until you start hearing it from somewhere. For most of us anyway. Because you're brought up thinking, okay, you like your body or you don't like your body. You're supposed to care about this stuff. This stuff matters. This stuff is really, really important in order to feel like you're winning at life. You're doing a good life. And then the option of going, oh, actually, well, that stuff doesn't have to be as important. I think until that question is offered to anybody, I don't know that many of our brains are going to go there themselves. So I'm curious where the first person who starts thinking about these things, I guess it's the kind of the rebel thinkers.
Yeah.
The ones who are much more likely to notice the pressures and influences of culture. I don't think I'm wired to naturally notice, but give me a nudge and then I'll go, oh yeah, let me look at that. But without a nudge, I don't know if I would get
It's not even just a nudge. It's also like, if you're going to go there and you don't have any company, there's a lot of room for doubt. And then you're like, am I crazy? Like, is this ridiculous? I think that the power of social media is such that by the time concepts land on our feed, there's a whole group of people who have been talking about it for years, and there's probably a book getting. So it's like, oh, you enter into these pockets of social media where this has been being discussed, and it's like, oh, and then you realize that you have this support network at your disposal, and that's very helpful to being able to like return to it, because when you go out in mainstream, this is not supported, and the doubt is too easy to creep in. But then you've got like this, you're like, you just go get some fuel, just like, oh, no, there's people. This is a thing. This is a thing that people are doing, and they're safe doing it. Like, they seem to be doing this and they're all right. So that means I must be able to do it, and I might be all right to some degree, because it's still really hard. And I'm not saying it isn't. And maybe it's worth talking about, like, what does it actually mean practically to be neutral about it? Like, how can you feel a way about your body and like have that be neutral? What does that actually look like?
What's coming up for me is the option of choosing something different. So it's sort of sticking with me what you said about, oh, but then there isn't a struggle. Oh, there isn't a struggle. I wonder as well about how many of us have this idea in us from life or whatever, that life is supposed to be a struggle. We're supposed to be struggling with something. Life is about growth and almost to not struggle. Well, I guess it's that whole, does that come down to this idea of giving up? Is it okay? Am I wrong if I decide that I don't want to struggle with this thing? And so for me, and what it looked like in actual practicality, and I'm thinking of it really around the time when I was coming to this idea of, okay, I really cannot pursue weight loss. Could I just get on with life and just live life without this being the goal in life? And I remember kind of having that flash of freedom. And maybe not everyone gets that. For some people, it might just be fear. But for me, in that moment, whether it was readiness or whatever it was about then, I can remember feeling the possibility of the weight being lifted off and really liking that feeling. So for me, it was about choosing that feeling. I'm choosing to lift this weight off myself, to step out from under it, because I like how it feels.
Yeah.
Now, some people might not feel safe doing that. Maybe they're not safe yet, or for whatever reason. Then I don't know what would get me to do that if I didn't have that reward of that feeling I got when I contemplated it.
Most people I hear from, I think, have access to the feeling of that freedom. It's just that it probably for more than 2 seconds, then the fear comes in. And that was my experience with it too. Like, and I've talked about this in different episodes where the first time I started working on body image before I started working on food. And I remember waking up in the morning and doing a body check because it was just the way I woke up in the morning. Like I just put my hand on a certain place in my body to see. I mean, not even on purpose. This is what I did. And I remember in the moment, I remember looking at my ceiling and being like, oh no, it's not as flat there as it was yesterday or as I want it to be. You know, I noticed this perception. And all these times, these ideas were sort of like very new for me. But I remember having this flash of insight into like, so, you know, like you could just not care. And inadvertently just feeling like, oh my gosh, that would free up my day. Like that would just make a really big difference to me this morning. Because when I perceived the body check to be giving me information that was negative, honestly, what that would do is like, oh, now I got to carry this all day. Like now I have to watch what I'm like, it's going to affect the way I'm eating. It's going to affect the way I'm feeling. So my mood, like all these things, it's like a real burden. So it was this moment of being like, yeah, you could just notice that and like not do that. It wasn't this clear cut though, because it was very embodied. It was like this real understanding of some people might feel that same thing and be fine. And just even, okay, so maybe you could even tap into it this way of just imagining what somebody like that might feel like. That's the access, like being able to understand. Maybe it was because people were talking about it and I was like, is that what they mean? Like, is that what they're experiencing? And so you go into it for a second. I remember being like, oh my gosh, like it felt like you wake up on a snow day and realize that there's no school or that, you know, like your meetings got canceled and you're like, yes, like I have the whole day now. Like, but I hung out there for a half a second. I was like, no. Like, that's not, no. All the like stuff comes in, you know, your brain, the safety brain comes in. It's like, no, you can't do that because if you do that, you're going to, blah, blah, you know, and then you're like, oh no, I can't do that. And that's honestly how it started. Like it was like just a half a second. And then I did feel fear, you know, and then of course I didn't really go through that day without the burden. I absolutely took the burden back and went along because it wasn't safe to do that. But I believe that little window of a half a second is all you need. Like that's then from there, it's like, okay, we can grow that then. That can become the beginning of something. And that remained for me a very, very small window for a while. But it was something to work with that eventually became something I intentionally started to work with over time. This was slow. And that now, today, it's not like I am free of burden. It's just that I remember the way, because over 5 years of, actually it's been more than that now, it's been probably 7 of working on that. It's like, oh, I know the path. I know how to get there. I've been doing that long enough. It's like the way, you know, have you ever watched, I'm sure you've watched the, what's the movie with Morgan Freeman and what's his name? And he breaks up the Shawshank Redemption. Yes, of course. And he's building that tunnel for years. And it's like, you build it and you build it and you build it. And eventually a few years later, you know, if nothing stops you, if there's not like all these interruptions, you get out, you know, it's like, okay, you build that long enough and you figure out how to crawl through. And then and then you're like, oh yeah, right, I've got that hole behind my poster over Kel Welsh, and then you crawl through it, and you're like, oh yeah, right, I know the way there.
Also, he had to crawl through a whole load of shit as well.
Yeah,
Do you remember? Like,
this is it's such a
feels,
good metaphor.
Did you just come up with this analogy just now?
It just came to me as an image because that's how I was thinking about it. Like,
that's awesome. There's a post there, Steph. No?
Do you think people even, the other day, it's getting to the point now where I'm writing things and I'm like, do I have to like reference what this even is? Because are younger people aware? The other day I referenced Desperate Housewives in my Wednesday Weekly, and I was like, do people even know that show?
There's some people don't. That's fine. They're the ones, they won't get it, but the ones that do get it, think it's awesome.
Well, yes, it is quite a metaphor. But on the other side, you got freedom.
Mm-hmm.
A whole wad of cash.
Yeah, you get to go and live on a beach making boats. Make sure you bury some treasure for the next person to find so they can come join you.
So we're trying to do here.
That's what we're doing here. Yeah. This podcast is your treasure. You are welcome. Anyone who hasn't watched the film is not gonna.
Yeah, it's just worth watching anyway.
It is a good film. You mentioned that moment of insight, and I'm not sure if we state enough the importance of personal insight, having your own insight. I think it's so easy to fall into the trap of consuming content, trying to absorb other people's stories and beliefs and methods. But those moments, it's those moments when your own mind does something different or sees something differently. That's the thing. Like you said, it's the seed that needs to be watered.
The embodiedness part.
Yes.
Yeah. Good point. I think what you're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong. So you know that moment when like something really makes sense to you and you're like, oh, I get it. I get that thing that people have been saying. Now I get it. That embodied sense. Following that, right? Like, it's like, that's the place to water. Not just necessarily well, that's not true. I also think the logical, like can't you feel your mind wrapping itself around something sometimes the first time a concept comes across, and it's intellectual only, but you're like, oh, there's something there. I'm not quite sure what that is yet, but that made something in my brain shift a little. And I'm like, okay, then pay attention to that for a while until you get that other thing, the embodied.
Yeah, but I've had so many times when I've heard something and felt like it's an embodied resonance. This is something that's going to change my life. And then I lose it.
Yeah.
And then I lose it. And again, maybe it's particularly with the stuff that I revisit over and over again. And I might have even mentioned this on podcasts before. Katie Barbaro.
Yeah, where'd she go?
I know. Yeah. I think maybe I haven't seen
She's living a life. She's just living her darn life.
I can imagine she is, yeah. And she was the first one who introduced me to this idea of just remembering and forgetting. And sometimes it's this lifelong remembering and forgetting. A little bit like earlier on when you were saying, you didn't use the word flood, but like in a body image moment, there's a reaction in you. And like that reaction, there can be this sort of split second or a few seconds of forgetting, and then it's remembering. And I think we start to remember quicker and quicker. So sometimes I've heard something and been like, that is incredible. That information is going to change my life. And I just forget about it. But then sometimes there's something and I'm like, oh yeah, that thing, that remembering that. And it's this coming in and out of. And I had this even this morning. I got up this morning and I did a couple of Byron Katie worksheets. But
you don't say.
I haven't done it for months and months. Okay. Actually, properly sat down and done the worksheet. Sometimes I do. It happens sort of automatically in my head a bit. But I sat down and I did the worksheets. I mean, and it was just extraordinary. It released me of something I've been struggling with for a couple of months. And I was like, how did I forget this? Because the scenario I did it on, I genuinely thought the problem was in the scenario. Changing my thinking about it wasn't going to help anything. And actually, when I really looked at my thoughts and turned them around and saw what I was doing, I was just released. And I felt quite teary about it. I was quite emotional. And I thought, how did I forget? How did I forget just how useful? Like, I go on about how this stuff changed my life. And I haven't utilized it as a tool for a long time.
Well, I was going to say to you, what do you think makes you forget? But I think that's a two-pronged answer, because sometimes it's simply just habit, like the habits we just lose, and like the well-worn pathway is just taking over, you know? But I also think sometimes the reason we forget is because there's something not safe about it. Like, you know, it's like there's something else more compelling that starts to come in. That's not just a habit-based thing. It's more like, oh no, I'm actively like moving away from this because it doesn't feel safe.
That's not where my mind goes with this situation. My mind goes, I think my ego got in the way.
How?
Because the situation was about me being very judgmental.
Oh.
Very, very judgmental, which I hadn't realized. I thought I was just right. So I think for me, in that situation, not
Could you
always,
be both?
but I think in quite a few. Sorry?
Could you be both?
Both what?
Judgmental and right?
Well, right by what standards? If we're just talking about a scenario, is there a right and wrong always?
Yeah, sure. For you.
Well, I was.
Now I'm going to complicate your clarity. Just
Yeah, I've lost it again, Steph. I've lost it. Hang on, let me get another worksheet out. Well, I think it can be valid and not as true as I was believing it to be in that moment. There's still a validity, I think, just in, again, to quote my dear friend Byron Katie, the only thing we're guilty of is believing our thoughts. So I could see how I'd got lost of it again. I felt quite tender towards myself as well. Like there was the sting of the ego, and then there was the sort of a relief and a release, because it was humbling. I was humbled, and so that initially hurts, and then it's like, oh, I can let this go again. This sort of loops back to the body neutrality thing. For the longest time, I thought, no, it is unacceptable for me not to continue to pursue work, especially if I want to help people recover from binge eating. I need to look like the example of that. I genuinely had this in my head that my body should be a certain size. Otherwise, why would anybody listen to anything that I've got to say about this?
Yeah.
And that was so misguided now from my perspective. But at that time, I really believed that.
Yeah. I think it might be worth us speaking to the things people really believe. The things we really believe, like, because those are the parts that gets us stuck. It's like you could be listening to this and be like, yeah, conceptually I agree with you, except that I really do believe this, and I don't see a reason why I shouldn't. And if I didn't believe this, these other problems would crop up for me, and that's why I choose to believe them. You know what I mean? So what are these barriers to body neutrality from the perspective of what feels true, or what is true in some cases?
Well, I think until we've got a basic premise that what we are thinking and feeling about our bodies is the problem, without that part, the rest of it falls apart. One of the reasons why, like I said, I didn't sit down and do the worksheet was because I didn't think there was anything to be challenged in the way I was thinking about it. So I didn't do a worksheet on it. I thought the situation needed to change.
Not yours personally, but what's an example of that, of a thought like that?
Let's say, I don't know, let's say someone close in your life, they should support me. Okay, so most of us would agree that, let's say in a relationship, that partners should be supportive of one another, right? So you have this belief they should be supportive. And then everything that is not that creates a reaction to that, right? Because they should be supportive.
Take me through this, though, because I don't want to gaslight myself here. Go ahead.
I'm really regretting choosing this example. Okay, let's...
I mean, no, we can. I'm thinking about it because I'm like, okay, well, if I were like, maybe Mike shouldn't be supportive. Maybe I think it's offering perspective. I don't think it's as clear cut as like he shouldn't be, but maybe like he isn't. He is, but for person, like I'm trying to personalize this. Like if he wasn't, it might be like my husband is going through his own stuff right now and can't be supportive. Like maybe that's a different way of looking at something, because I don't think that I could get to a place where it would be like, he shouldn't be supportive, or I can't, you know what I mean? Because it's like, well, that would completely compromise the values of my relationship. You know what I mean? And I couldn't get behind that. And I don't think I'd want to get behind that in a similar way. And I feel like maybe using a body image example might be helpful, but like my body needs to be small to be attractive, smaller to be attractive. And I really believe that. And it's like, well, if I don't want to believe differently, and that was my roadblock, because I didn't actually want to believe differently. It was like, no, that is what I want to believe, because if I don't believe that, there's like a whole cascade of things that happen after that. But also, one of those things might be, I'm less burdened. I don't know if that would have been compelling enough.
But at some point you were willing to go, okay, I don't want to believe that my body should be smaller for me to be okay, let's say, or to be more attractive, or however it was kind of coming up for you at that time to have value. Where was the willingness?
It wasn't that. That wasn't what shifted. What shifted was the sentence, I can't cope with that. And that shifted. I still believed that my body being bigger was less attractive and that it was expected. Like, and I even think I believed it should be smaller. I think I still held on to that. It was more the idea of I can't cope with that I turned around.
Okay. Well, this is kind of the neutrality part, right? It's like being able to cope or tolerate.
Yeah.
Having a body that doesn't match this belief
Yes. Yes, exactly. I don't think my body beliefs actually changed that much. My preference was still for a smaller body. What I saw in the mirror, I still thought I looked better, smaller, but my ability to cope with that changed and to tolerate that changed. Whereas prior, it was like, I can't cope with that.
Where do those beliefs sit now? Because we still live in a culture, right, that would say if your body is more like this, then it's better in certain ways. So
yeah, but
I'm assuming the belief's not completely gone.
Yeah, but I both can cope better, and I believe I can cope better. So it doesn't feel as dangerous to me as it used to.
Mm-hmm. But sorry, I was talking about the belief about your body. The belief about your body should be
I
smaller.
still have the same opinion. I
Yeah.
still think when I see pictures of my smaller self, I still like them better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like that used to destroy me. You know, it occurred to me the other day. I used to be one of those people where if I said what size I was or what weight I was, the humiliation that would descend, like I could not admit to anybody what my size pants I wore or what weight I was. To me, that felt like the ultimate exposure in this way of like humiliation. Humiliation. I wanted to cover my face. And then I was reflecting the other day about how, because I was thinking about, it's a long story, but I was thinking about like, well, I name what my pant size is like right in the first post on my grid, like on Instagram. It's like, here, meet me. Here's about me. And one of the things is like, I'm a size 14. Da, da, da. And I'm like, why can I say that now? Like, how come I can tolerate telling the world what size pants I am, knowing that like people I know are going to read that, like ex-boyfriends of mine are going to, like this was something that to me I could not tolerate. And I was like, the reason that I can do that is because I can see it. I can take it. It has nothing to do with anyone else. It's not about what you know about me. It's about what I can confront about me. And when I used to not be able to name that, that was because I couldn't accept it. I could not look myself in the mirror, metaphorically and literally, and own that. To me, I was still identified with my smaller self to such a degree that like it was denial, somewhere. And now it's not. Now I'm like, no, that's what I am. And I can see that. I can be with that. I can tolerate that. And then all of a sudden I can tell you that. You know what I mean? And so the tolerance changed because I started to value my life more. I started to understand that my whole life was dependent upon a size. And I get really indignant talking about that. This is the fierce self-compassion that did start to emerge at this time of body neutrality, which is interesting because fierce and neutral feel different. But it was like, are you kidding? You're going to miss out on your whole life and be embarrassed about yourself because of the size of your body, and your whole life you're going to waste for that? You're going to self-sacrifice? No. And it was like, because that fierceness came up, tolerance changed, because all of a sudden it was like, are you seeing what I'm actually tolerating? You're actually tolerating feeling like crap about yourself every day? No, you need to turn this around. And of course, it's so easy to say. It's not like my mom didn't say that to me at different points and like a little bit nicer before, but I was like, I don't care. Like, I just didn't care. But when something inside, it's like, I will literally waste the rest of my life this way. I know I will. I know I will die. I will live to be 100 years old and I will still be doing this. I know it. I can feel it. And then it was like, well, that's no. And protecting myself, starting to stand up for myself was the key to that neutrality, I think, because then it was like, then something else becomes more important all of a sudden in that fierceness where you're like, I became more important and my life experience became more important. So I suppose, like, I don't know how I got there. Like, the first thing how that happened. But I think there is a relationship, I think, between neutrality and self-compassion.
Well, there's a separation there that I think is really helpful, perhaps. This stuff begins with how we feel. Like what you were saying about being able to confront what you can confront and tolerate in yourself kind of sets the foundation for then what feels possible to allow other people to see. And I think that's so sticky because so much of that is enmeshed for people around the fear of what people think. I mean, you really embodied it when you were talking about that shame and how you used to feel about anybody knowing your weight or your clothes size, that what that would actually do to you, that came from how you were thinking and feeling and believing and everything inside you there. And I think when people really see that. They get that insight for themselves and they can see they're doing that, which is what you were describing there. You're like, I can see what I'm doing here. That again, I just keep looping back around to this idea at the moment of personal insight. What would you offer to people that you think allows some space for these personal insights? Okay, we can't just force them. How do we create the opportunity for people to start seeing what's true for them?
What's the episode we did on from yourself? What was the episode?
Yeah, self-perception.
That is the first thing that comes to mind. I don't remember what episode number that is. But if this
121.
conversation, oh my God.
No, I don't know
Okay.
if that's true. I just said that because how cool would it be if it
You
was
trick
true?
me every time.
I know you're very
I am
trusting.
really
Trusting. I was going to say gullible, but I'm going to say trusting, and I'll be much more generous.
I'm going to look it up. If this conversation is resonating with you, my recommendation is to, like, as this part of the conversation about being able to be with yourself and to see
Stefanie.
things in yourself.
Stefanie,
What
episode did I say it was?
121. It is.
I kid you. I promise. I'm not even. I'm going to screen share because
I believe you. I'm just looking it
like,
up myself. I'm looking it up myself.
Yeah, it's 121.
Because you do know these things, like you keep track.
It's crazy.
We have to leave it all in now.
Oh, happily. I want everyone to know.
Yeah.
About my guess.
Let me twist your arm, Sarah. Yeah, let's do this every time. I'm just going to throw a title out there and you just guess. So yes, if self-confrontation is something that feels like, ooh, that pinched a nerve somewhere, episode 121 is one to look at, because I think that is yes, go ahead, listen to that episode. But in reference to the answer to this question, I don't think that it was and what I just described about the sizing and the comfort did not come first. That's just something I realized later. I think what it was like this moment of, this is me and me in this life. You know what I mean? It's, yes, other people have to do with it, but like my lack of being able to prioritize my own lived experience isn't going to hurt anyone but me. Again, this was not a new concept. My mom used to tell me that all the time. But I couldn't take it in. And I guess like still what I'm trying to get at is like, what brings you to a place of eventually being able to do that? And I think it's probably just a constellation of factors that include exhaustion and insight, where you're like, I'm doing this. There was discomfort for a long, long time. This was not an overnight thing. It was like, when I started seeing fat bodies on Instagram, I rejected them. But I knew there was something about it. I was like, I need to be uncomfortable, and I need to not unfollow these ideas or these images or these concepts. I need to stay with them through that discomfort. Whereas I think originally, prior, maybe at some point, there would have been like no, I don't want to. The exhaustion got to such a point where there was something inside of me that was only willing to go to a place of being like, you can look, just start hanging around this stuff. Don't do anything personally. It was a slow burn of stepping a little outside of my comfort zone, stepping a little bit outside of over time. It didn't just happen. It wasn't like, you know what? I see it. I see the forest through the trees and I'm going to change. Like, no, that is not how this worked. It was very slow and like little by little by little by little, because it was too much of a departure. So it wasn't a moment of arrival. It was one small piece of readiness, which if you're listening to this episode, you're already at that, right? Like, otherwise you would have turned us off and by now. And so there's got to be something in you that's like, I'm willing to hear something out, even though I'm not ready to do it, or I'm not ready to like even fully believe it. Or, who knows? We get lots of YouTube comments of people who, not lots, but we do get some YouTube comments of people who are like, I totally disagree with everything you said. There was one that came in recently the other day, and then they proceeded to cite all the things that they disagreed with what we said. And I went to go right back and be like, well, this is what I meant by that. But then I was like, in the end, I just wrote, I would speak to your points, but I just spent an entire episode doing that. The whole episode was about.
I didn't see this comment.
I didn't write it. I just was.
No, but I didn't see the comment even that you're talking about.
It was literally like going through our points and saying the opposite of them. But everything I would say back to you right now is what we said in the episode. People, okay, we also see what we want to see and hear what we want to hear, or potentially we didn't communicate it well. So yeah, so there's some kind of, even just hearing it, like letting it just like be ingested in some way, even 20%, I think is part of the way you take a small, it's like part of stepping into a discomfort, because you're not going to listen to a conversation that makes you completely uncomfortable unless there's a part of you that's ready to be uncomfortable. You know what I mean? So I think body neutrality, I think is, if you've grown up in this culture, and you have, and if body image has been a thing for you, this is not something, I don't think you can do this fast, because it's still hard. It's not hard. It's just annoying.
I saw the flash of anger come up then of that. You're like, having to do this work. It's like,
it's annoying. It's not hard anymore. It can be. I mean, there's moments where it's hard. It's not as much of an effort, but it's annoying that I have to. I don't want to. It'd be so much easier if I didn't have to. And then I come back down to like, well, a lot of the things would be, it's like, no one promised you easy, Steph, and it's a little bit, sometimes I do say that to me. It's just like, yeah, okay, well, something's going to be hard. Being a human is going to have hard things. And this is one of my hard things. So, okay. Like I will not wilt, because if I do, I'm going to give up so much more. My life's going to be so much harder. Again, this is one of those logic things that like everybody knows and everybody hears, but it's easier said than done. But at one time, those were just words to me, and now they feel true.
There's a few really good points that you've made throughout this episode, and I want to try and summarize them for people.
Go for it.
The point you make about this taking time, I think, is a really important point to try to hold, because I think many of us feel very impatient. So I could listen to something like this back then and be like, yeah, but you haven't told me how to get there. You haven't given me the exact steps to get there. Like, I need to get there. And I think we're talking about changing a value system. We're talking about choosing something that is so different to what you've been holding on to, that it's going to take a while to sort of figure out how to safely let that go and hold on to something else at the same time. Because if you let go too soon and you haven't got a firm grasp on this something else that's going to be able to hold you up, a sense of more neutrality, then I think that's the point where people feel really unsafe, because I'm stuck between these two places. I don't feel neutral, and neither do I feel like I can continue pursuing this. I really liked what you said about the tunnel. You're forging a new path as well. Like, you're going down a path you haven't trodden before, and there's making way for that. And that takes time, and it takes, I don't even like the word work, but it's more like intentionality and bringing your mind back to where you want to go. So listening to something like these sorts of podcasts, or anyone else in the sphere who are talking about body neutrality in a healthy way, listening to those are all ways to keep kind of, oh yeah, like, this is what I'm trying to do. This is what I'm trying to do. That the importance of personal insight, to be asking yourself questions, because that's, I think, how we get insights as well, when they don't just ping off in our minds automatically. It's by asking ourselves questions. What feels true for us right now? What is it that we want for ourselves? And being honest about that, because there'll be times when your priorities won't be in the place that part of you thinks they should be in as well. So there's that inner conflict part of it as well that's challenging. And also that body neutrality doesn't mean that you don't have any feelings about your body. If you have for many years, those feelings are not going to vanish. You've shared, I think, quite eloquently what that can look like in terms of people being able to see that. Because I think people would look at somebody like you, Steph, and go, well, you do this work, you've been doing this for a while. You must just feel completely fine in your body. Okay, you don't see a picture, but then you just go, oh, well, I don't like my picture, but that's okay, because I've chosen not to value that. And I'm just never give it another thought. That this stuff is much more visceral as well. So I think, in conclusion, those are my thoughts.
Can I add? I think if you don't know where to start, like once this podcast ends, it's really immersion, I think. So following accounts that speak about these things all day, like just a lot of immersion. Reading books like More Than a Body, we will include these links below. Body Neutral by Jessie Nealand, More Than a Body by the Kite Sisters, The Body's Not an Apology. I think I've recommended these elsewhere. And I run a course every summer. It's an 8-week course on the tools that I use for to sort of be body neutral. It's things I develop myself along the way, and I run it once a year, and that's another resource to potentially to help continue immersing yourself and like offering yourself more concrete concepts and tools to work on this stuff.
I didn't know you're doing another course on body neutral.
It's my body workshop, body image workshop.
Oh, the body image workshop.
Yes.
Okay, just people need the title if they're.
Yes, I forgot. It's called the Body Image Workshop. So unique and specific.
You are a course machine.
I like running courses.
You just churn out these courses, and they're incredible.
I've got a body image workbook and webinar, which sits on my website. It's like $47. And I really like the workbook itself. It's just journal, it's just journal questions, and it's a whole series of them. And I went back and reread it the other day because I created it years ago, and I'm like, that's good. Good questions in here. So next one up is body image workshop for the summertime.
Which is brilliant. I would much rather go to a course live with somebody anyway, but sometimes it's just not possible. So she has some evergreen stuff, apparently. She's not keen on telling you about it, which just makes it all the more intriguing. Why don't you go to her website and check it out?
Not a secret.
Okay.
All right.
Well, this has been fun.
Yeah, so much.
Thanks for joining us, and see you on
We'll
next
link the
episode.
Shawshank Redemption below. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.